The de-professionalization of gaming. This guy has jokes. We've seen the staff these studios have been bringing in as of late. They are anything but professional. And let's talk about them Blizzard lawsuits, because some of y'all can't be trusted around women. Assassin's Creed Shadows, anyone? They had the Japanese parliament investigating the game. Bungie right now is in hot water for stealing art from an artist. Professionalism. Don't make me laugh. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Life So Crazy. It's the Vongola Boss here. I swear, just when you think the gaming industry can't get any more unserious, it goes even further beyond with the foolishness. So, unless you've been living under a rock, the talk of the town in gaming has been smaller scale games. You know, the Schedule 1s, Balatros, Clair Obscur's Expedition 33s, you get the point. Phenomenal, well-received titles that all have this in common. They were developed by small teams, in some cases one person, and are doing more with less compared to larger studios that can't even get a game off the ground. And we're seeing this happen more and more frequently, which is apparently a problem because, as some are calling it, this new status quo will deprofessionalize the games industry, leaving little room for roles that are not integral to game development. Now, before you get all sad and emotional, remember there is a serious lack of accountability in the industry. But as we'll see in the article we're covering in today's video, the deprofessionalization of the games industry was only a matter of time, and something they brought upon themselves. Sorry, your current circumstance is not because of gamers who recognize quality and chose accordingly. After seeing a large presence of small publishers and studios making up the majority of booths present at PAX East 2025, and hearing much conversation from devs looking for short-term contractors to fill gaps for their games, senior editor at game developer Bryant Francis speaks on the deprofessionalization of video games being on full display at the PAX East convention. According to A16Z marketing partner Ryan K. Rigney, it's described as a trend driven by new AAA and quadruple A fits in this category titles struggling to move units, older games continuing to dominate playtime year after year, and smaller scale games seeing monumental success. These factors, when combined, will, quote, drive career professionals from the traditional professionalized side of the games industry. Well, first, let's address the fact that this has been an ongoing thing for some time now. Placing blame on the success of solo devs and smaller teams conveniently ignores the litany of layoffs and studio closures we've seen over the past half-decade, which were already doing a great job of moving professionals away from that side of the industry. No, I'm not talking about the departure of those brought in as a response to the COVID gaming boom or to meet contentious diversity quotas, but actual serious talent that was mismanaged on projects that should have never been greenlit and left either due to frustration with corporate meddling or were let go when the project inevitably flopped. In both cases, many took their talents and decided to take the risk to start their own projects. And anyone who possessed even a modicum of foresight saw that this was the natural conclusion for those who didn't want to leave game development. But what's more worrisome is this is an option that's becoming more prevalent because of advancing technology. Similar to what has happened to gaming media, it's an evolution through decentralization, which means more competition for those who were once firmly established and renowned legacy outlets. These alternatives have always existed, albeit on a much smaller scale, but with the decline and uncertainty of AAA game development, we're seeing a shift with more accessible tools allowing creatives to throw their hats in the ring, which terrifies them. With all these success stories outside of traditional means showing a new way forward, many are eager to get in on it, but are quickly learning that due to the inherent structure of smaller scale game development, there won't be any seats for them at the table. Which brings us to the crux of the issue the author has with deprofessionalization. My favorite game I saw, We Harvest Shadows, is being developed by the First Tree solo developer David Whaley. Whaley explained that he's hiring a contract coder to help with the dense system design fueling the farming part of his horror farming simulator. The story was the same everywhere I went. Solo devs, two-person teams, and publishers fishing for low-budget indie hits were the talk of the show. I want to be clear here. No one I spoke with at PAX East should feel obligated to give anyone a job. They're small teams making the most of limited resources, and it's the acceleration in game development technology that's made it possible. What feels wrong is how few people seem to benefit from this status quo.
What an odd thing to say.
A wild takeaway that completely misses the fact that That's the point. The entire trade-off in indie development. Ideas that would have never seen the light of day if pitched to a AAA studio will get a chance to shine. But because of that, they won't have the benefit of extra resources that a larger company would offer. And history has shown us that more isn't always better, especially when you don't know how to properly utilize it. The grievance here is realizing that the indie scene, which is on the up and up, is offering no refuge to those being driven from larger studios. The big business that is AAA gaming allows for many ways to get a slice of the pie, but the same doesn't apply here. And rightfully so. Good luck convincing the 15-man team or solo dev that the game they've been bootstrapping should invest in cultural sensitivity consultants.
That's okay. You can keep it.
These kinds of devs can only afford to concern themselves with the brass tacks, things that will actually move the needle. In the event they do hit it big, the smart ones at least will still continue this strategy while allowing for gradual expansion, lest they fall into the trap currently plaguing larger studios. Case in point, in response to an article reporting how Pal World and Helldivers 2 devs wished players understood the difficulty of implementing what they perceive as easy fixes, the communications and publishing manager for Pal World had this to say. The same people who say they made money, just hire more people, are the same people who get all pissy when a company grows too big and becomes too quote-unquote corporate. Sure, we could mass hire devs tomorrow, but you risk changing the company culture. Have to find the right people. He continues. The word quote-unquote sustainable has become a bit of a boogeyman for many, but the goal is to make games in a sustainable way that doesn't mean bloat hiring and burning all your funds. That's how game companies fall into the usual traps and become slimy. Just let devs cook. Great minds think alike, because similarly, the studio behind Claire Obscure Expedition 33 understands this as well. In a recent interview detailing what the studio planned to do next following the release of their hit game, the portfolio director of Kepler Interactive, Matthew Handrahan, confirmed the studio planned to take the necessary steps to avoid this irresponsible practice. He says, quote, "For now, our vision would be to stick to a close team working in the same city with less than 50 people on board, focusing on one project after another, and keeping this agility and this creative strength and smartness of a small group of passionate people wanting to do something big. That's how video games were made for years," he continues. The team that made Ocarina of Time or Half-Life 2, I think those were max 60 or 70 people. Don't quote him. And that kind of size allows for good decisions and great creativity. He adds that the studio might recruit a few more members, but it won't start working on multiple projects simultaneously, and they will deliberately avoid growing too big and unwieldy. We want to keep the organization that made us successful. And while that's a recipe for success, it's the last thing the writer of this main article wants to hear. You may not like it, but the status quo here and for the foreseeable future is you either take the risk to strike it big by your own means or contribute to a small team consisting of jack-of-all-trade types with a unique vision. To which I say, welcome to the Wild Wild West. Now, I've made slight jabs at specific roles, but who is the writer really concerned for? My PAX trip validated my fear that three professions are especially vulnerable in this deprofessionalized world: artists, writers, and those working in game audio and music. These roles seemed vulnerable because on these small teams, they were the roles developers mentioned doing in some kind of shared or joint fashion. All three risk compartmentalization as asset creators, their work treated as products you can purchase off the store shelf. Every artist in games knows how hard it is to make a living doing what you love. In-house artist positions have faded away as companies look overseas to produce as many assets as humanly possible at the lowest living wage. Enthusiasm for AI-generated assets, and he doesn't hold back here, that look like dog
redacted
in the quote-unquote gun-for-hire mindset. Working artists aren't worth anything to game development because they're producing goods to be used, not participants in the process. Art directors are in a slightly more stable position, but only by virtue of knowing quote-unquote what looks good and telling someone else what they want to do. As someone who recently shipped his second game as a writer, the cuts to game narrative teams hit close to home. So here we're getting a bit personal. The GDC 2025 State of the Industry survey reported that of the 11% of developers laid off in the last year, 19% of them worked in game narrative, the highest of any responding demographic. The reason? Too diverse diverging trends, the growth of successful games that don't feature much narrative, either focusing on deep game mechanics or story-light multiplayer, and the spread of story-driven games authored by the creative director and maybe one or two collaborators create conditions that lower the number of available jobs. He then continues expressing his frustration on how writers tend to be treated within the industry, as they're brought in typically later on in the process, which is only made worse when their job is seen as something that comes into conflict with the rest of the development team. Which makes sense, and I can understand both sides. In the case of the development team, their work is the foundation everything is built upon. Because when it comes to designing games, the gameplay loop takes precedence. It's only after a solid gameplay loop has been established that they transition to building a story around it, which is easier said than done. And while he doesn't give any examples of how writers can lie in opposition to the development team, ludonarrative dissonance comes to mind, which is an issue where a game's gameplay contradicts or undermines the narrative the game is trying to tell. I digress. He speaks to how some studios, in order to unite the two, would rely on narrative designers to write and implement narrative events. But the writing on the wall for the position was still clear. It doesn't hold the same amount of value. Lastly, he speaks to game, audio, and music professionals who work to create licensable libraries that's usage and implementation is up to the discretion of the designers. And while this work is more vital and can't be done simply by one person and comes with more longevity, it still is not treated as an integral facet of game development and is still at risk of being deprioritized for roles seen as more essential. All that to say, there is no job security here.
First time?
Look, it needs to be said whether the writer wants to hear it or not, but these roles are less essential. And when I say less essential because comprehension is lacking on the internet, I'm not saying they're not important. They have their place, and we're better off for it. But we have to understand there is an order of importance here, a hierarchy. If you don't have a solid foundation for a good game with fun gameplay, well, good luck. Gaming, unlike other artistic mediums, is interactive, and if what you're interacting with isn't engaging, everything else is moot. I've said this before, but we've long passed the point of diminishing returns when it comes to graphics and visual. At the end of the day, the appeal of these games made by smaller teams is because of the gameplay experience they are offering. And while it's not often something revolutionary, it is at the bare minimum different, unique, and fun. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's crazy seeing how the writer doesn't bother to acknowledge how gaming even got to the point where the industry could even benefit people that weren't essential to game development. Because if he did, he'd realize it's the same reason why everything is such a mess right now. If anything, this deprofessionalization may very well be what gaming journalists like to call a return to form. Small teams of passionate, scrappy developers who knew the ins and outs of making a game to the standards and practices that made games good in the first place. And when you look at it like that, the industry should have been deprofessionalized a long time ago. You see it all the time online from people who are disillusioned with the current state of modern gaming saying they only play indie nowadays. It's pretty much become a cliche, but can you blame them with how the scene has grown? These games are not the passion projects of yesteryear. They're the future. I've seen multiple games and devs come up organically, simply from promoting their work on social media and building a community. They went on to achieve a level of success that has given them the opportunity for more growth and expansion. This is the path forward, especially at a time when companies want to increase prices to $80 with no distinguishable improvement. They want you to dig deeper into your wallet and eat the costs that were required to bring these non-essential people on. Because it's bringing on all these types of people who can only do one thing and oftentimes not very well, and trying to get them to coalesce with others for the purpose of making a bigger, grander game that falls flat when it's all said and done, but they want to recoup their investment. So that'll be $70 plus tax, please. Now, alternatively, for $50 and under, you can get a more contained experience that price tag wise under promises but over delivers with the final product. Now we're talking. The deprofessionalization of gaming. This guy has jokes. I've read my fair share of stories that goes on in game development. And we've seen the staff these studios have been bringing in as of late. They are anything but professional. And let's talk about them Blizzard lawsuits, because some of y'all can't be trusted around women. I'm ad-libbing at this point. Baldur's Gate 3 came out and Larian Studios put their proverbial nuts on the rest of the industry's head. And how did they respond? By crying that this standard of excellence shouldn't be expected. Please. Bungie right now is in hot water for stealing art from an artist. Assassin's Creed Shadows, anyone? They had the Japanese parliament investigating the game. Professionalism. Don't make me laugh. But hopefully I made you. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And drop a comment down below. I want to hear what y'all got to say about this. Check out the 2 videos showing up on the screen to see more Life So Crazy. It's been the Vongola Boss. I'll see y'all next time. Stay professional. Peace.